Hello and welcome to another episode of Energy Insights. Today in the studio, I've got Matt Quinn. Matt is the Chief Data Officer for Microsoft. Matt, welcome to the studio. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Turan, and great to be here. My name is Matt Quinn. I am the Chief Data Officer for Microsoft UK. It's a privileged role for me to be able to work with customers across many of our sectors and bring the capabilities and skills and the experience that we have in different areas together. The role really focuses on our Azure data and AI technology. So that's data platforms, everything from operational data through analytics into our AI technologies. It's been a real evolution for me. I came from a background of consulting and getting work done at the front end, focused on BI and budgeting and planning and forecasting, solving real business problems. And as the world moved into this era of cloud, as software development changed and transformed, how we focus on and keep anchored on what business value, why are we developing this new piece of technology? It's not technology for technology's sake, actually what business problem we're trying to do. So my path through that, from customer success at Microsoft into our financial services business, has really given me the foundations to bring into this CDO role and help us ground, as a product company, how do we take not just the features and functions of our technology, but the capabilities it brings and align those to what the customer is trying to achieve, why they would use this technology. And that's what I absolutely love doing. I've been with a customer this morning talking about how do you turn this into strategy? How do you make this work for you? And love doing that. And so thank you for the invite to share some thoughts today.
Brilliant, Matt. And there's nothing better than bringing the technology lens to solve a business problem. So far, we've seen a lot of people get confused in how do I apply this technology and forgetting very fast why we're doing this project in the first place.
Technology
right?
is so easy, right? We go, oh, shiny toys, I want the new thing to play with. But the reality is to get real value from it, to make it sustainable, it has to demonstrate value, deliver value to the bottom line.
Great. So Matt, 2024, the data landscape and the analytics landscape has evolved, and it's a huge topic. If a customer is thinking about data and analytics today in the energy sector or in the financial sector, what are the sort of components and things they should be thinking about? What would a strategy in 2024 for data analytics look like?
So I think back to that point a minute ago, I think a data strategy has to start with what is the business's strategy? Actually, data is an enabler. It's been talked about as the fuel, the new oil. It's going to go lots of different metaphors. But the reality is it's a capability, it's an asset that can deliver capability into your organization. So really it has to be about how do I unlock that for my organization? What strategic imperatives do I have at a board level? That might be around operational efficiency. It might be about capturing new markets. It might be about green transformation. It might be about optimizing grids in different kinds of energy formats. Data doesn't live on its own. It lives in your organization. It lives in the ecosystem that your organization exists in. So it must be linked back to those strategic initiatives. And that's the grounding. That's the place to start.
Brilliant. And in that very vein, right, it is about having the ability to use that data in a meaningful way, because there's no lack of data anymore, right? It's not the era of I don't have the data. It's about how do I put that data into motion to get some analytics out of it.
Definitely. We went through this phase where it got the cost of storage got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So we stored everything and everything and everything. But the reality is, how do I unlock value from that data? And some of that data may be hard to understand. We don't know the provenance of it. Some of that data may be dark data, right? We have it, but we haven't necessarily worked out how to unlock value from it. So I think how you ground the opportunity for data, like take this sea of data that we have and unlock value. I often use the phrase, and for somebody with data in their job title, it's quite a controversial opinion, but why do we care about data? I would argue we don't care about data. We care about information that is hidden in that data. And we care about that information because it helps us take action in our organizations to make a better business decision, to make an operation more efficient, to capture a new market, to do something. So the real value of data is what only comes to life when you do something with it. And I think that's the important part and that's what I love about the way that the kind of wave of innovation that's happening as you bring together cloud and the ability to accelerate value from data. You put it into the hands of people at the edge of your organization, the people who make decisions and take action every day. That's how you unlock the value of data. But doing that means it needs to be trusted and governed and available to the people who need it to make those decisions. And that's the real power right now.
All the right components of the data strategy. So Matt, generative AI, it's deemed as the biggest disruption so far in this space. What is so disruptive about this technology? We've seen many incarnations of better analytics solutions out there, better models, the commoditization of cloud, high performance compute, faster analytics. Talk to us a little bit about why generative AI is so important, so disruptive, and so prevalent to getting started with.
Look, I think it's an interesting kind of wave upon wave, right? So we see technology innovation, we saw the connectedness of the internet. I saw a recent video that Bill Gates recorded from kind of 20, 30 years ago, probably maybe 30, 40 years ago, around we living in the age of information at my fingertips. And as we pivot now into an era where it's not just about information, like the internet and mobile took care of that, right? We all have access to any public information anywhere within 10 feet of us where we are sat right now. Actually, the next wave is putting expertise in my fingertips. And I think that's where generative AI unlocks the information and the data that is everywhere in the public world. And in an enterprise space, transformative technology gives us the enterprise information that we have in our organizations at our fingertips. Now we add generative AI onto that. We compound that ability to turn that information into expertise and turn that into action. Like, how can we get AI to accelerate our ability to take action, to make decisions, and then act upon them? And I think that's where there's this inflection point. And we see this radical transformation in literally not even 2 years since, ChatGPT kind of blasted into the zeitgeist of public knowledge. That wave and the pace of change has been powered by the fact that cloud enables us, any organization, to embrace and adopt this technology quickly. And the ubiquity and access to data has meant that this capability can now be fueled by that data. Because the AI is great and it's very powerful, but without the data to fuel it, it doesn't really get you very far. So that confluence of events, the underlying technologies, have brought together to be a real catalyst for change. And we see that generative AI has just captured the imagination of a totally different audience. As somebody who's been involved in data for 20 years, typically it was difficult to get the board's attention to fund or think about or engage with data. Oh, it's an IT problem, like there's databases over there. The reality is there's a real recognition this is actually a business transformation opportunity, and AI will be a component of solving that. And that's a real flip. And we see it a lot where actually instead of kind of engaging very much with IT-led parts of the organization, we're being pulled in by the C-suite to say, actually, help us transform our organization. These are the things we want to do as an organization. How can you help us do that with these technologies?
Brilliant answer. I love that. And we're seeing the same, Matt, in that it is very much a business transformation opportunity rather than just a technology transformation opportunity. One of the things that we also see with large language models and generative AI, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is historically any new technology has come out with a need for the human to learn how to operate it. And that's meant either relying on the experts to first learn the technology, pilot it before it could be put into action, or to look at experts from externals to come in and support. But these large language models understand English or your native language as the input to go and do something. Is that the fundamental shift that's driving the adoption?
I think that's captured the imagination for people, actually, the difference of the way to interact with the machine. I think much like originally IT was very punch card driven, it took a lot of effort and labor to instruct the machine to do something. And as layers of abstraction came in, like higher order programming languages made that a little bit simpler and people like me could write code. Then there's the next wave of actually, now we have kind of low code components where actually business users can compose the processes and flows that they need. You still needed to use a mouse and a keyboard, right? But the mouse and the keyboard was that wave of innovation 40, 50 years ago. It opened the graphical user interface and that kind of interaction opened computing to a whole new audience that couldn't have used it before. What we're seeing is that next extension of that, to say, actually, I don't need to think about, and I love the analogy that someone talked to me about, was I don't know where the feature in Excel is to do a certain kind of pivot table. I kind of know it can do that. I used to be really handy because I was the person who knew that you click these 3 things and there's a keyboard shortcut and you can find this feature. Now anyone can do that, right? You've just democratized that ability to do more with the software you're already using, because I can ask in a human language, like, how do I do that power pivot, and how do I do that present the data in a table, bang, and it's done. So I think you put more capabilities, more expertise at the fingertips of everyone.
That's a great answer, Matt. So my following question from there is, Microsoft is deemed as a leader in the AI space. Could you talk to us a little bit about what is the unique proposition Microsoft brings to the table with AI?
Thank you. I think it's a great perspective to have. But the interesting thing to my mind is Microsoft has always been a platform company. We built software and operating systems that other people built products on in order to deliver value. You didn't buy Windows 3.1 for Minesweeper. Maybe you did, but like most people bought it because other people built software that did the things you needed to do on that platform. We built that enabling technology upon which others delivered outcomes. And I think what we're seeing is the maturation of that over 30, 40 years within this AI space. We have made those right investments. We have backed the right development of capabilities. But it's not just the large language model. Right? The large language model is the magic Lego brick, and I always love to use the Lego analogy. But it's not the only Lego brick. And actually, if you want to build something, you need that whole ecosystem of tools. So I talked earlier about how do you use the data, the fuel for this model, to ground it, to make that model specific and do things that your organization wants with the knowledge that your organization carries. Building that capability needs the data platform that sits alongside that AI model. Then you need the tools that build the applications that interact with that model and put that capability in your users' hands. So they either embed that into a tool that everyone's using every day, whether it's Teams or Word or Excel, or build bespoke applications that your users are interacting with. So it's the development tooling and the chains around that. But again, this is a new paradigm, and there are constantly evolving challenges in this. So how do I govern this? How do I train and engineer my prompts? How do I put content safety in here? How do I manage this system? How do I look at the end-to-end ecosystem of value? All of those are systems that we've built tooling around, some which has matured over many, many years, some of which is now being augmented and accelerated specifically for generative AI, like Prompt Shield. These are capabilities that we're baking in that look at the value chain of AI left to right, not just the perfect model. But equally, we have great relationships. We have that exclusivity with OpenAI where we've made significant investments in them. But we also have this model as a service capability. There is no one size fits all, and actually certain types of problems, certain domain spaces will need specialized models. You might need small language models. You might need some of the open source models from Hugging Face or from Meta. These kinds of marketplace models, bringing those and making them available through the same tool chain. So you simplify the ability to build applications that might need multi-models. You might need to combine that with more traditional machine learning. That ecosystem play is where Microsoft's grounding in being a platform company becomes really powerful in helping us help our customers unlock value from generative AI.
So this isn't the Microsoft of 20 years before, right? This is the Microsoft of today with an open ecosystem, embracing partners, embracing open source, bringing all of that into a platform and making it easy to consume. So in essence, it's the end-to-end integration proposition that Microsoft has, whether it's bringing your own Office 365 data from your emails to your chat conversations, meeting you with copilots there, to sort of building custom solutions around your data with the public information where it makes sense, building it with a DevOps first approach, having LLM ops embedded, and having the internet scale cloud compute to launch these applications as and when and scale them as you need to.
Absolutely. There's one ingredient, and you touched on it very gently there, but I think the other component is that Microsoft's model has always been around partners as a route to execution at scale. So I think our network and investment in partners has meant that actually we have the ability to take this, it'd be great to have this technology, but if it doesn't actually get into the hands of customers and built into the business and domain and industry specific tooling that they need, then it would be no good, right? So actually the partner network and partners like Avanade, like how do you take this expertise, that deep partnership with us to really unlock what the technology can do, make it specific to the customer's challenges and needs, and actually build that, actually make it work. Like we build the platform, the partners, the Avanades of the world then take that and build the tools. They take the Lego bricks and assemble them for what the customer needs. I think that's, and again, that superpower we have is not just the technology, but how do you bring the people and the process and that technology together to solve problems for the customer's organization. That's, I think, the trifecta of how we bring all of that together.
Brilliant. Matt, you have the advantage in your role of working across sectors, and while you spend time in energy, you spend time in finance, you look across, you speak to Microsoft, and what sort of patterns are you seeing of applications that customers are building with generative AI? I mean, a lot of times when I first time speak to customers, they think generative AI is a ChatGPT. You go in, you ask a question, you get an answer, right? But fundamentally, the applications can be made intelligent by embedding this technology. So there's really two questions there. One, should customers be putting their enterprise data into ChatGPT? And two, if not, what kind of architectural use cases are you seeing that customers are building into applications with Gen AI?
I think the answer to the first one is you need to be very conscious about the decisions of where you're putting your data and what kind of trust and responsibilities you have. So I think Microsoft's responsible AI framework starts with this idea that your data is your data. So you can take your private proprietary enterprise data and augment capabilities like our Azure OpenAI with Azure OpenAI service, the large language models, with that data. It remains yours. The same as if you use the SQL Server and you put your data in it. It doesn't become ours just because you put it in SQL Server, right? It's your data. So I think that's really important when you're using a service that is provided by anybody in that space to really understand what the terms and conditions are of that before you go there. So I think that's an important lens for it. The first wave, though, is very much about that challenge response or prompt response. I'm asking you a question, you give me an answer, but it is conversational, so it's contextually aware as a kind of a sequence of events that I'm interacting with. I think that's captured people's imaginations, and that's the table stakes, right? That's about knowledge management. Perhaps I've got a set of manuals for how to perform a specific set of tasks at a refinery, or in a financial planning, what's my guidance and rules for how do I forecast CapEx and how do I depreciate an asset? Well, actually, those are things that perhaps ChatGPT over those bound documents can give me really contextual rich advice, and that will be a prompt and response. So that's the first wave that we've seen, early adoption of generative AI for the enterprise in. But that's just scratching the surface, right? I think that kind of pattern where you augment the model with your own resources, your own data, is step one. And most organizations that we saw in the early days, that kind of early adopter, that was where they started to train the organizational muscle. Learn, how do we do this? How do we operationalize it? How do we scale it? How do we manage it? How do we get observability of what's happening in this system? So that when we're ready for more advanced use cases, we now know how to do this. We've learned the skill, we've trained that organizational muscle. So I think what we're starting to see big waves of is organizations saying, well, the next wave of this is more agentic, right? It's more about that, how do I make the AI a genuine agent for me? So instead of just asking questions and getting a response, how do I get the agent to do whole tasks for me, complete a chain of events, to complete a task that may be multiple steps and decisions along the way, safely, securely, with explainability, with safety at the heart of all of that. But those are where you start to unlock much more significant and disruptive capabilities through generative AI.
Perfect. So the future, as we see it unravel, is the agentic fleet of autonomous teams where you build the guardrails and given them an objective. And is that world happening now? Is that world still evolving? Is there more nuance in how the technology needs to be built out for our customers to embrace it? Or are you seeing across the field customers already building solutions with agents?
We're seeing customers building this, like getting ready for production. They're typically starting in ring-fenced zones, but they're gearing up and ready to start doing this. The scope and scale and sophistication of those tasks may be relatively straightforward in the early days, but I think as organizations get that flywheel going, they'll have the experience and the expertise to start to grow in scope of what they can do. Much like the internet, right? 15, 20, ouch, I'm older than I think I am, 25 years ago, when I first kind of started to engage that, the tasks you could do on the internet were pretty simple. I could search for a phone number and then I'd go back to the analog way of dealing with something. As e-commerce came in, now actually I can complete some of those tasks. We move to the noughties and kind of actually the internet banking starts to come in, then open banking starts to come in and they can use apps. So the sophistication and the network effect starts to really grow. I think we'll start to see that happening with generative AI. The interesting thing is generative AI is benefiting from the previous investment in those foundational technologies like the internet and like data. So the pace of innovation is off the charts. And not just the pace of innovation, but the pace of commoditization. So things that 2 years ago were science fiction just become like, we took them for granted. There's nothing new in there. And actually some of them are so commoditized now, you can just literally turnkey, click with a Copilot Studio, here's some files and some data I want to ground my process in, have the tool build all the augmented generation, surface that in my Copilot, and things that even 2 years ago were a lot of manual effort and developer time are now low-code, rapid deployment. So I think we're starting to see a shortening of the curve of innovation and really starting to see a ramp. So those first pilots of agentic type tasks, we're seeing real excitement around those, and I can see that only accelerating at this point.
There is a risk with customers not adopting AI in the right fashion. And generative AI in the early days was known to hallucinate on your data. It was providing the answer with such conviction that sometimes you question whether, am I wrong in my own understanding of that data, right?
2 and 2 is 5, right?
Yeah. Well, it certainly made you realize that you were wrong and 5 is the right answer. But there is that fear, right, that with early adoption of this technology, if the data is not correlating the right responses, then users lose trust in the data. And the moment you lose trust, right, the investment's not there anymore.
And that's a huge risk to an organization and to the industry as a whole. Like, trust is absolutely fundamental. So I think one of the things that we've been very conscious about is building that responsible AI framework. So that stemmed from what we did in our responsible AI for systems engineering teams dating back to 2017, and bringing that to the kind of series of principles and guidelines and tooling to support that, and publishing that as a responsible AI framework, kind of open sourcing that so that others can kickstart their own responsible AI frameworks. Brad Smith, our chief legal counsel, authored a book called Tools and Weapons. Every tool in human history has been used as both a tool and can also be used as a weapon. So I think it's important upon us all to think about how do we use the tools that we have responsibly. It's important for us to provide guidance and assets to help organizations do this safely, to do this right. But I think there are steps that you can do. There are patterns and practices that have been evolving and been emerging from this that are now gaining real weight and simplifying the ability to do them. Things like grounding your models in data that you know to be true. So for example, resource augmented generation, how do I take known documents? I gave the example earlier of a set of manuals for how do I depreciate CapEx, for example. Actually, if I ground the responses, I can force the agent that I'm chatting with to only provide answers from this specific set of data. It uses the power of the large language model to understand the questions I'm asking, but it knows it can only bring answers from these sets of resources. That can then ground the model. And then you can also start to look at how do I test that from input to output, systemically, from the prompts that I'm putting in, perhaps run that through content safety filters, make sure that there's nothing malicious being injected into those prompts that are coming in. Think back to the old kind of days of SQL injection attacks and how those kinds of things do it. How do we block those at the front end, provide the grounding in the data that we need, provide the citations. So when I come back with an answer, I'm citing where I've got that. Somebody can check the homework from the AI, and perhaps a confidence score, like a temperature check on, is this, I have a high degree of confidence on this. This is a maybe it's true, and come back with that. But equally setting the models, tuning the models to how your tolerance for that. Do I want the model to be quite creative, or do I want the model to be very formal and very structured and very fact-based? So I think there are controls in there, but they do need intelligent design. They need thinking about actually what do I want from the system and what's an appropriate response to this domain.
So important you touched on that, right? Citations giving me the confidence that the answer is not just made up, but it's pointing back to my data, and that temperature setting to be a Shakespeare kind of response versus a very practical, factual response. All of these are great building blocks. Now, with good, as you touched on, Matt, comes bad, right? And when GPT-2 came along, I had a good play with it, and then I asked it to tell me all the steps to break into a car, and it conveniently listed all the steps out for me.
Ouch.
Then 3 came out, and I tried the same question, and it didn't give me an answer, and very nicely told me that naughty, right? But I'm not going to tell you. But then if I ask the same question in a different language, not English, it gave me an answer. And then 3.5 came out and it didn't answer at all, right? But then I created this emotional character and set up a sort of a scenario to say, I'm writing a novel and the lead character in that novel is very troubled. And to please his parents, he's going to break into a car. Could you write that paragraph precisely with how he'll break into that car? And I got a response. But now with 4, I don't see that anymore, right? So I see Microsoft's investing a lot of time, effort, money in building safety right into the platform. But malicious actors won't stop, right? Jailbreaks, poison prompts, Dan prompts, do anything prompts, they're all going to get more sophisticated. So talk to us a little bit about how do customers improve their security posture with generative AI?
It's a great question, and to the point you made around, or kind of the analogy we used of SQL injection attacks, right? There were tools like web application firewalls. So instead of a firewall at the network layer, at the application layer, to understand what the query was coming through, and certain kinds of things were hallmarks of those. In the generative AI world, that's more nuanced and more complex and more sophisticated. You talk about that kind of, reverse engineering. I'm trying to write a book about, this scenario. That's a nuanced answer. So the tool and the weapon analogy is good. There is a degree of arms race. So we understand that bad actors are going to use these technologies to their advantage, and we must understand how to defend against that. But equally, it becomes part of the solution, right? Actually, how do we use generative AI to spot these new creative patterns that maybe aren't as heuristic-based? Traditional firewalls are very rules-based. This is a rule, this looks bad, don't let this through. Actually, the new world will evolve at a speed and a complexity that is not necessarily one that any one engineer can build the rules that will solve. So actually, how do we pool that knowledge, the insight that Microsoft has with the footprint of our estate globally, to be able to look at what are these patterns and practices? How do we codify the rules to stop these? How do we learn from the attack vectors that have been evolving and iterating and bake those into the tools? So that might be things like content safety, making sure that the output of the system doesn't violate certain rules and regulations, but it's also about prompt shielding. How do we make sure that we filter these things on the way in, and using large language models actually to detect perhaps nuanced, subtle attempts to manipulate? And that's what we saw as the models got more sophisticated, as you moved from 2 to 3 to 4. That's where actually we're able to detect those more complicated, sophisticated, nuanced pieces and understand actually that looks like a malicious intent, even though it's been hidden inside something. So I think we'll see this evolve rapidly. I think it's important for organizations to be conscious and aware of this, and to identify ways that they can work with us, with our partners, with the tools that are available to minimize and mitigate those risks wherever they surface.
It's great that the models are becoming more sophisticated and you've got tooling around it, and partners bring the experience as well in having solved these problems. How do you address them even at scale, right? The following question from there, Matt, is a lot of customers are in production. A lot of customers are still getting started. If a customer is getting started with generative AI, how should they approach the first use case, the first, dipping the toe in the water kind of experience with Gen AI?
So I think there are 2 ways to go about it, and I use the analogy a lot of the factory. When the first car rolls off the production line at a factory, it costs probably €1 billion to build. When the second car comes off the production line, it didn't. And then the unit economics kicks in, so actually each one that comes, the total cost starts to reduce. And I think building that factory pattern into your organization for generative AI is really important. So those first use cases, as you identify what's the business value of them, actually part of the business value is in laying the foundations for the use cases that come behind it. And it's not going to cost €1 billion. Actually, we're investing in the physical infrastructure that you can build upon to build that soft factory, for the partners to help you build that center of excellence, that capability in your organization. So the first use case is what we're seeing lots of organizations do, is start with lower risk scenarios. So they may be more internal facing. They may be scenarios, one of the really common ones is in things like compliance auditing. So actually what contact center reports do I have? What data do I have that I need to be able to audit or reason over? Actually, there's a human in the loop there, and often in many use cases, those are things that are being 5% of calls get screened by a human. Well, actually, we could have AI screen 100% of those calls and then have the humans mark the AI's homework. And so that change of ability. So that might be, if you're a retail energy customer, for example, that might be in contact center scenarios. How do I detect a vulnerable customer? How do I have the AI signal internally to the call center agent? This might be a customer who's in distress, they might be in financial distress, to just give a prompt to say, maybe ask a couple of different questions here. So the risk there is minimal. You have a human in the loop. And many organizations we're seeing start with these kinds of use cases, build and train those capabilities before they start putting directly customer-facing AI capabilities into the market, because those are the ones where there's a human supervision rather than a human in the loop. And I think that's where the risks need to be really carefully borne out. They absolutely will also be where real substantive value comes from, but it's a trading act, and I think the crawl, walk, run is really important.
And like you said, Microsoft's invested in that production line. Avanade is investing in building the accelerators, piloting the LLM ops to help customers leapfrog in their first use cases, but it absolutely has to be business value driven. And ultimately, the first use case does cost more and take slightly longer to set up the foundations, but the ones after that benefit from it. But in reality, what we're seeing with customers is 3-4 weeks to production in an MVP, and then iteratively building a transformative solution. Are you seeing similar things in your view?
We are, and so I think that the key piece is also some of those first early use cases that were avant-garde 2 years ago, those are now relatively turnkey, like you say, weeks to time to value to prove a concept, maybe 1 or 2 nuanced things that are bespoke to that organization, but the rest of it, the expertise that an Avanade has, having solved similar organizational, similar patterns of implementation, means that you can accelerate that time to value, get the viable product into the hands of users, prove the value is there, maybe identify a couple of unique steps that need an extra bit of investment of energy to think about how do we do this uniquely to our organization, build that organizational muscle, get that into the hands of users and inspire them. Because I think that's the other component here is the more your business users interact with this kind of technology, the more it will spark the ideas for where else could we transform our process. I think generative AI has an opportunity to take existing business processes and refine them, make them a little bit more better, make them a little bit more efficient, drive some operational efficiency. Once you've learned how to do that, the opportunity is not to make today's process better, it's to reimagine how would that business process be designed. If I had a clean sheet of paper, knowing what I can do with data, knowing what I can do with AI, would I design it to work the same way it did before? Probably not. Maybe I can reinvent that process completely. And that's where you get this combination of start quickly, rapid time to value for those first use cases, and then start to take feedback from your organization and reimagine what that business could be. And that's where an Avanade with that business lens on it, not just the technology problem, how do we look at the process end to end and think about reinventing that with AI, with data as the enabler for it.
So Matt, when you look across the sectors and you see use cases, what sort of use cases are you seeing customers execute on within the energy and the financial services space?
So look, I touched on one there in the kind of contact center space, that kind of auditing of my interactions with consumers. So that's obviously a very retail-focused example. But if we think about more sophisticated kind of back office or enterprise, if I think about an integrated energy company, how do I use generative AI to identify ways to deliver operational efficiency? And I kind of hinted earlier about the refinery operator or someone in a field engineering role. How do we give them the ability to surface the kinds of data and interact with a process or a machine or a repair that needs to be done in a way that is natural language? Energy is particularly an international business. Perhaps the company that designed the widget in the refinery didn't write the manuals in whatever language whoever's operating the machinery is in. So actually, how do we use generative AI to enable whoever's in front of a piece of machinery to actually proactively fix that, use the manuals and documents wherever they live, surface the knowledge I need to be informed and make the right decision about how to operate this, how to repair it, how to replace it, understand what's going on with a piece of machinery or piece of kit, right through to grid transformation. How do I look at the cause and effect of events outside of the network? And I always think of the example that used to be of when halftime in a football match, everyone goes and turns the kettle on, and the whole country used to kind of have a brownout moment as the kind of power load got too high. Now the grid is much more sophisticated at this point. Renewables cause that to happen as the wind changes and the sun changes. How do we look at what's going on in the market, bring external data of what's happening in the world into the context of what's happening for our automated decision making about renewables and our balance of power? There is a lot of sophisticated capabilities. Now those are things where traditional data science, machine learning, predictive analytics have been at the heart of how that works for years to decades. But actually, how do you enrich the unstructured outside data, use generative AI to bring additional context into that, perhaps find new nuanced ways to do different things? So I think we're just scratching the surface of where the opportunity is in that space.
Where do you see small language models fit in? I mean, there is a lot of talk in town about small language models being the new next solution for very specific problems. What are you seeing, Matt? What's your view on small language models?
So I think there's a combination, really. I mean, and obviously Microsoft has recognized this. We're developing Phi, and the kind of the model to deliver that kind of small language capability, but still have specific, more general purpose, but still small language models. So as we think about small language models, Microsoft has obviously recognized that small language models have a role to play here. With Phi 3 emerging and Microsoft Research investing in that area, that's still a general purpose model, but it's a smaller language model. We also see lots of very niche or domain-specific models trained and fine-tunable on very domain-specific sets of data. So I think the real play here is it's not about one size fits all. It's not that one model will rule them all. There's an ecosystem at play here, and there's a right tool for the job. I talked a moment ago about traditional machine learning and data science. Actually, that will still exist in that ecosystem. These are all Lego bricks with which we will build our tools. And I think where we see small language models particularly being relevant, and I can see this in the energy space, is how do I push this capability to the edge? So yes, we have our cloud scale analytics, cloud scale databases, cloud scale platforms with the large language models sitting side by side with them. But actually some of this work I might want to do out in the field with low or no or intermittent internet connectivity. So this is where we're seeing things like neural processors going into the Copilot plus PCs. So actually pushing some of that compute, some of that natural language processing into the end user's device to be able to reason and provide the inferencing with these models right at the edge. And that does mean they have to be smaller, right? Physically, the volume of compute and power and data that exists at that end is different. So it will be a spectrum of models and capabilities. And I think that's why Microsoft's ecosystem of AI play is strong. It's not about this is our model, one size fits all. It's actually how do we take model as a service, bring open source models from Hugging Face, the meta models, how do we bring the uniqueness that we have with Azure OpenAI service, and models that organizations will train themselves. Combine those with one set of tooling, with tools like semantic kernel, where you abstract the developer away from some of the nuance of that so they can build their application once. And if you change out the model or you go to the next iteration of that model, the application doesn't need rewriting. You might want to retest it, you'll re-prompt engineering it, test its groundedness, but you don't need to re-engineer the whole application. So I think this is where we start to see the tooling and the ecosystem really come to value. And those small language models will absolutely play a space in some very targeted domains.
So we've talked a lot about agents, we've talked a lot about models and the integrated proposition that Microsoft brings. Having said all of that, Matt, garbage in, garbage out. Now, we've had a lot of incarnations of data platforms. If I look back with warehouses, those star schemas, then we came up with data lakes, then data lakes became data swamps, then we had mesh architectures, and here we are at another disruption. What is the proposition that Microsoft Fabric brings to the table?
And so Fabric is a great enabler of this, and I think it comes to this democratization of data play. There is a huge set of capabilities that have evolved and have been built by Microsoft and by the industry, by the market, and they're now available in various different tools. So today you could do the things that you do with Fabric, but you've got Synapse over here, perhaps you have Databricks here, you have a number of different capabilities. Actually, what we need to be able to do is simplify the ability to access all of that. So whether you've got a capability that needs kind of Spark engine and you need to do tasks that are at scale, whether you've got a very conformed set of data and you want data warehousing style capabilities, whether you've got data ingestion, data engineering type tasks, or you're a data scientist. These are different tasks that are performed by different personas. What we don't want to have to do is keep rehumping and massaging the data from around the place just to service different needs. So I think the uniqueness with Fabric is this kind of concept of one lake, and that the data, regardless of the engine you're using, whether that's the kind of data warehousing engine, whether that's the data science engine, whether it's Power BI, having that set of data in one format, so we're not having to keep moving it back and forward just for the sake of serving a new tool. The ability to pool the compute. I don't need different compute for different areas and have a lot of compute sat idle in my data warehouse while someone else is trying to do reporting over here. How do we pool that compute? So these capabilities are about simplifying and democratizing what's happening with the platform. And the killer to my mind is, how do we remove non-value adding tasks? So moving data from A to B, massaging the data from format A to format B, these are tasks that are relatively expensive to do and don't deliver direct business value. You need to do them because they let you do something else. So where Fabric comes in, the ability to shortcut data, to connect out to other clouds, to other platforms, to other data warehouse technologies, and have that data mirrored into Fabric as a turnkey exercise. Not have to have somebody who's permanently managing, keeping that in sync and operating, make sure it stays up to speed. And if the schema changes now, I need to change the schema at both ends. Removing those kind of drudgery tasks enables those same data engineers to focus more time and energy on the business outcomes, the business value that you can get by enriching that data and turning it from lower quality, raw data into the kind of bronze medallion of bronze, silver, gold, and curating that up the stack. Because different personas will want different data. A data scientist wants the raw, unfettered data because we don't know what facets, what features of that data might be relevant to us. But if I'm in the board and I'm presenting in front of them with what were our sales figures, or what was the key driver behind a particular trend in our business, I want the gold standard curated data where I've got the lineage and I've got all the traceability on that, and I know exactly how this was arrived at. So I think Fabric brings all of that together. And we talked about the kind of GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. If you want to deliver AI at scale in your organization, you need a ubiquity of data to serve those use cases and those outcomes. So where we're seeing first use cases work on small islands of data, you can do one or two AI use cases and have that manually curated set of data. To unlock the power of generative AI at scale across your organization is going to need data that's available, it's trustable, it's got provenance, you've got governance around it, the security and the boundaries set so we know who can and can't access what, and then feed the AI capabilities with that so that you can surface the ability to act on that data and the organization. So I think the two go hand in glove. AI is only so useful without the data, and data needs to be in good shape, needs to be easy to manage. That's getting to be a bigger and bigger task. So how do we remove some of the drudgery so that we can focus more energy on the higher value tasks? And that really is, to my mind, the fundamental premise of what Fabric is about doing.
I love how you said they're not mutually exclusive, right? You can get so much with AI, but if your foundations of the data, if your platform, if the trust, if the quality of the data is missing, if it's really hard to get data in, then AI is not going to be very effective longer term, right?
It'll be the rate limiting thing, right? Data will become the rate limiting step of how much progress you can make with AI, unless you've got it set right.
And Fabric is the turnkey SaaS solution which takes away all of that. As I look back, right, 5 years ago, to build a modern data platform, there had to be an exercise of months of effort in building the platform.
Just getting the plumbing right.
Yeah, and then it didn't stop there because you had to think about all of the components that went with it, and you'd build everything, but you then were thinking about the first use case to solve, and the technologies had moved ahead, and there was the regret spend of, do I go back and re-gut this and build another platform before I can start to solve for a use case?
And more, I guess, sinister than that. I always just use this in the development world. Every line of code you write, you then have to maintain. So if I've built data pipelines to engineer and move the data from A to B, when something changes, I now have to go and maintain that. So by minimizing the amount of effort that you have to put into manual bespoke developments, if it's a connector that pulls that data in, or a mirroring feature from a snowflake into Fabric, how do I enable this just to be turnkey so that actually set it up, make sure that it stays up, now I have the data that lived in system A is now available in data lake alongside other data. So that's the context piece. When the data lives in silos, it's only so valuable. If I can bring context across different left to right horizons from my organization, that's where you unlock real insight. And if you want to unlock the power of generative AI in that more agentic fashion, the ability to complete tasks that maybe span those silos, cross system boundaries, maybe even organizational boundaries in a complicated supply chain, then you need that data to be available, to be managed in a well-structured way that you can trust, so that the AI can make the right decisions on the behalf of the user that it's acting as an agent for.
Matt, looking back at the proposition of Microsoft Fabric, there are customers out there that have sort of adopted a platform already, right? Some have settled on Databricks, some have brought in Snowflake. Are we asking our customers to start all over again?
I'm glad you asked that question, actually, because it's a really important one. I think there's a recognition that there's not one size fits all, and Databricks in particular is a first-party service. Now, Azure Databricks is a first-party service. It delivers a huge amount of value for our customers. It's an area of investment for us as Microsoft, and that combined with the power of Fabric is where we see lots of value. But equally, every organization changes, right? There's no destination, you have arrived moment with your data platform. The minute you get there, you'll acquire or divest another company, and they'll be using a different technology stack, and they'll have data in a different cloud somewhere over here, or maybe some of this is still on premise. The ability to rapidly integrate that and connect that into that organizational wide data ecosystem is really powerful. So that comes in Fabric's recognition of things like shortcuts. I can virtualize data that lives somewhere else. As far as my consumer of that data is concerned, it's in one lake, but actually it's pushing the queries out to an underlying data store somewhere else. So that surfaces that capability. Or if I've got a Snowflake, for example, and the ability to mirror data that lives in Snowflake. Snowflake does what Snowflake does well and continues to do in that customer. Mirror the data into Fabric such that those parts of the organization that are using Power BI, that are using the tooling that sits right there, that want to build that into a resource augmented generation capability, to vectorize that data to service an AI model, it's sat ready to go alongside. So I think whilst Fabric does all of that kind of data platform work, the recognition that we don't live in a kind of homogeneous world where you will have one tool that solves all those problems is really critical. And the ability to bring heterogeneous work in, to bring partners in that are technology vendors that may on paper look like competitive technology vendors in many ways, as well as creating an ecosystem where there's a marketplace in Fabric. So other vendors can bring their products and capabilities, surface them in Fabric, to deliver value to the customer right alongside that data. I think that's where we're looking at more of that, again, that ecosystem play, delivering value, focused on what the customer needs, not what we as a product vendor necessarily just want to sell.
So the ethos of adopting open standards rather than defining standards is the way Microsoft is building that ecosystem, aren't they? With Iceberg being supported as a standard, with Parquet being supported as a standard, you could cooperate, but equally bring in, transfer, move from one platform to the other. All of that becomes just turnkey again.
It does, and it equally fosters innovation, right? We see it the world over. Would the internet have boomed like it did without TCP/IP as a standard, right? The standard was there, then HTTP was a layer of abstraction on top of that, right? So the ability to have a standard that allows lots of things to talk to each other fueled an explosion of innovation. I think we're seeing that same thing with open standards like Delta Parquet, like Iceberg. Like, how do we use and embrace those formats? Because that allows other vendors to come and innovate on and alongside and inside platforms like Fabric to deliver value over the long tail. It's not about one product and then that's it. It is a long-lived ecosystem play. So it's not about rip and replace. Back to the original question, it's not about rip and replace. It's about augment. It's about enrich. I don't think any enterprise organization has the luxury of a greenfield project. It's always brownfield, right? We're always having to evolve and iterate what we've had before. It enables you to do that in a staged and phased approach, not a big bang, rip this out, replace it with that. That more iterative, more agile approach, what will deliver the greatest business value, what will deliver return on investment for re-engineering this part of the process, aligned to this strategic objective that we want to achieve, that enables you to take that real business transformation lens to how do I drive my data strategy? What do I do first? And where do I make the right investments?
How is the receptiveness to Copilot embedded in Fabric? Are you seeing customers excited with the use of being able to ask in natural language for a report and it being created? Are you seeing customers use it quite a lot and like it?
I think it has this kind of mixed response. There's a first moment where kind of some of the data engineers and report builders are kind of, they have that kind of natural fear of like, well, hang on a minute, that's what I used to do, and like, is this going to be out of a job? And I think I step back to an analogy of the spreadsheet and the accountant. Accountancy used to be a very paper-based. You tabulate and add all your numbers together. When the spreadsheet came along, you didn't have to add the numbers up again. And the reality is that didn't make all the accountants redundant, right? What it did was enable them to remove drudgery from their role and do higher value tasks. And I'm seeing that kind of initial reaction from people. If they then turn that on its head, they recognize, oh, hang on a minute, really my job wasn't about finessing what color was the border of a particular report and making sure that the edges of the tables lined up. Remove that drudgery from me. I can now deliver greater value to my organization. I can be of higher value. And I think that's where Copilot in all tools, Power BI and Fabric specifically, how do I get the time to value to be reduced? But equally, how do I democratize this, right? It suddenly means the time to value. If I'm a sales engineer or I'm in a boardroom, perhaps I'm a reservoir manager in an oil company, I need an answer to a question. I don't want to have to kind of go and raise a ticket and request that somebody goes and massages the data and presents it back to me. The ability to ask questions in natural language means suddenly I've democratized the ability to turn raw data that's sat in my business. It's perhaps coming from a well that's right there. That data is going off, being turned into information, and now I can query that to take action without having to understand SQL or Spark or how to build a Power BI report. I can interrogate that and get the insights I need to take action, and that's hugely powerful. Now, we're in the early stages of that becoming a reality and really starting to deliver value. But where we do see it happening, there's that recognition that suddenly this is a capability for everybody. It's not just a IT function or a report building function. And I think that kind of tipping point hasn't quite been reached. The capability is there now. How that's adopted is the important part. And I think the people and process part, change management, how do you embrace this technology, get it put into the right hands, how do you train people how to use it? That's when we'll start to see that really snowball.
A fool with a tool is still a fool, right? So that organizational change is so important. There's so much emphasis on building and executing use cases, but then if you don't bring users on the journey, if you don't help them realize the value they can get in, and even better, right, involve them in the envisaging, the execution, then they become the champions of that transformation. About Copilots, right, I keep telling customers as well, is editing something off a report is easier than trying to like stare at a Power BI thinking, where do I start building one, right? And we see a natural segue to asking Copilot to start creating a report and then going into the widgets and editing it has been super impactful for customers. So we've talked quite a lot about Fabric, and it's clear that it's a different but a new way of working with other platforms, but also a capability that's end-to-end should you choose to operate in it. It's a real enabler for generative AI. What is the sort of implication of energy customers using it, right? Like, why would energy customers use Fabric? Yes, we get it's really an enabler for Gen AI and that it can work with other workloads, but a customer who's on a decarbonization journey, looking at using renewables, has a lot of data already, right? Like, what would be the driver for bringing that data into Fabric?
So I think there's a couple of angles to my mind that are really powerful. One of them is around, I keep using the word ecosystem, but like that, energy companies don't tend to exist in a vacuum either, right? So particularly if you're looking at how do we green our environment, there's typically a supply chain of renewables upstream. If we think about project management, there's going to be a complex supply chain of how do I get to the point of building this wind farm, or kind of then connecting that to the grid, and then how do I go about operating this? That ecosystem of partners that's there, the ability to make decisions that's driven on data that comes from lots of different sources, some external data, some internal data. How do you surface that into the hands of the decision makers? So that might be in the finance department where you're budgeting, planning, forecasting for what does this look like. It might be in a more operational capacity. I've got these tools up and running. Now I actually need to think about how do I project manage this asset? So actually we've maybe outsourced the operations and management of this tool. We've got real-time streaming data about what's happening with these particular assets that we have. on the supply side, along with great insights that we've got on telemetry that we've got on our demand side, combining those data sets, right? It's not, how do we break down silos? I think that's the key to where Fabric pays real value, but equally surfacing that across organizational boundaries. So the ability to democratize and simplify integration of new data sources. As you bring a new partner on board, a new outsource provider, a new manufacturer, or a new operator, how do you simplify the streamlining of that data into your universe? That's really powerful, and the ability to do that with low manual labor effort in the data engineering work. But equally, how do we turn that into value and surface it out to our partners? Perhaps our operating partners need the insights to make decisions about how to efficiently operate that field, and the ability to interrogate that without having to have engineers write their reports, surface that capability through generative AI to our field engineers. So those kinds of ubiquitous, that kind of flywheel and the virtuous cycle, I think where Fabric comes together is in simplifying lots of those capabilities, removing the amount of drudgery that's being done, the plumbing that has to be done before the first bite of data lands. So then as you get ready to scale this, you get ready to pour tons and tons of data in there, terabytes, petabytes of data from multiple different sources in different formats, in different granularities, at different levels of quality. Now that's where Fabric starts to really come to bear, like that kind of medallion architecture that has matured through more traditional data lakes and data warehousing technologies, surfacing that capability with less low-value tasks to get there. That's where Fabric will unlock value. And ultimately, energy companies, like any organization, are resource constrained. From a budget perspective, they want to make their dollar go as far as they can, and actually they really want to spend their dollar on investing in new assets and technologies. So how do we make sure that the platform simplifies their time to value? And that's where Fabric absolutely is.
Spot on, right? Ultimately, a commodity doesn't exist alone in a vacuum. It's cross-commodity. One impacts the other. Having cross-functional, cross-commodity data in one platform at the scale that Fabric provides enables an analytics that's not been possible before. So Matt, on that topic, right, if we look at big implementations, big rollout of Fabric, and I don't want us to be constrained to just the energy sector, but it would be good to sort of hear from you, what are some of the big rollouts that you have seen of Fabric? What kind of data volume, what kind of time series, what kind of scale are we looking at customers from an adoption perspective, but also what sort of lessons learned, challenges have you seen come up in those implementations?
So there's two components to this, and I think size and scale are, the phrase is big data, right? So it's always been about size, but actually, I think there's a combination of two dimensions of that. One of them is the volume, like sheer mass of data, and we are seeing scenarios where that is petabytes, many petabytes of data, much of which is changing fast, because velocity of data is the other component to that. How fast is that data changing? Is it, petabytes of PDF files? Well, it's pretty static data, and we can store it, but that's only one value, only one dimension of it. Actually think about velocity of that data, so real-time telemetry and streaming of this data. So as customer zero for these technologies, the signals that we have in our organization about what's happening with Azure, for example, what's happening with our modern workplace tools, the ability to interrogate that data internally at Microsoft. If you think about how many signals are generated by every Teams message, every kind of individual piece of telemetry and security data that we have, the ability to then analyze and provide analytics and capabilities over that to gain unlock insights. As customer zero, eating our own dog food almost, that is probably one of the biggest use cases that's very publicly talked about. But if we think about more customer-centric scenarios, I'd also like to think about the breadth. So where I see real power in the energy space with Fabric is how organizations are looking to bring different sources of data together and then use those to augment. And I talked earlier about budgeting, planning, forecasting, but actually what does that mean as the reality of supply and demand changes for renewables, for oil? How do I bring extra contextual data in? So I have my own first-party data, and if I'm an integrated energy company, I'll have, what am I spending on wells and management and discovery, and how do I bring the physical product from the ground and then transport it and deliver it through to what's happening in the economics of the world. actually how can we use the telemetry that we've got? How can we use generative AI to make sense of external data, to enrich what we have internally, and then use that context together to provide analytics to decision makers to think about how do I redo my in-year forecasting? What does that mean for my long-term planning? So I think the breadth of data is as important a big data dimension as we're seeing for the volumes. And that's where I think energy companies are really starting to steal a march on many markets, because they're bringing huge breadth of data. So if I'm an integrated energy company, I might have retail, I'll have wholesale, I'll have exploration and production, I'll have refining. There's a huge spectrum of things. There is opportunity to unlock value by bringing that whole set of data together. And that's where we go from not just petabytes and volume of data, not just real-time streaming analytics from what's happening at the wellhead or what's happening at my refinery or what's happening at my wind turbine, but equally what's happening in my customer base, what's happening in the news. How do we bring all these things together to give analysts the ability to make informed decisions about what they do next?
Perfect. So, Matt, we've covered a lot about Fabric, and I feel it's been transformed over the past 18 months with now real time embedded into it, and it's probably got a very exciting roadmap. Now, given we have you as the CDO on the track today, we'd love to hear from you. What are the big bets Microsoft's making? Where are the big investments going into the AI space from Microsoft?
So I think it's probably elements of this are above my pay grade and probably tented from what I see, but I think there are definite trends that we see in this space. And we touched on one of those earlier with the ability to see this as an ecosystem play. So I think the broadening and opening of this platform to expand the scope of vendors and partners, of capabilities that get baked into the technologies like Fabric will grow and grow and grow. On the generative AI side, I think where we're seeing the real maturity is in the breadth of models. We are in kind of Moore's law phase of generative AI, where every 6 months the power of the models doubles and the compute used to drive that same model halves. So we're in that exponential growth in capability phase. So I think predicting is a relatively dangerous game, but what we are seeing is efficiency and ubiquity of this technology. We're seeing the cost to deliver scale being reduced. We're seeing the scope and scale of these models grow. So the ability to have a larger context window, and bring more data into the conversation or the prompting that I'm doing so that the model has a greater set of grounding, that's becoming really powerful. I think a lot of the innovation will also come around how the tools are being used. So the technology is growing at this kind of rate. Organizationally, the ability to keep pace with that is very, very difficult. So how organizations build that organizational muscle, take those skills and those learnings and really start the flywheel going in their organization. I think that beyond the technology, there is an operating ability to execute that is growing exponentially. And we see that with expert partners like Avanade, who work super close with us, like with our engineering teams, with our delivery teams, and with our customers to see this technology at the coalface. That's where that capability becomes real. Like, that's where the organizational muscle comes. You'll have built on the shoulders of giants. You'll have done this 100 times, so you can bring that expertise to the customer to deliver value faster, and the customer can stand on the shoulders of giants to get the next one done faster, faster, faster. So I think we'll see where the technology's done this, organizational capability lags that, and it's now starting to accelerate, and that's where we'll see the really exciting developments, not just in what the technology can do, how it can be applied to solve real-world problems and achieve goals that align to an organization's strategic objective. So that's the bit I really get excited. You read something in the press and you see a new use case, not just a shiny thing, but this is what it did to the organization. Yeah. That's the bit that's exciting.
Love that. And technology will evolve, right? Small language models will keep getting smaller, large language models will keep getting larger. But ultimately, all of this needs to come together to solve what? A business challenge, right? Innovate, disrupt, right? And it's a shame if we don't lead our customers to that journey, right? So I'm really excited that you came on the podcast. Matt, I want to give you the opportunity to plug something.
Actually, I think there's a couple of things here, and I'm a big advocate of, to the analogy I used about the car factory, getting started is the key part to this. So if your organization is thinking about this, and there's maybe some experiments happening in a department, I would ask organizations, particularly at a board level, to be thinking the other way around. What business problem do I have? What solution am I looking to do? What's my strategic? They've probably stated in my public, annual report what our strategic initiatives are for this year. I'd love board level executives to really be open to asking the question, and that could be privately one-to-one. I've done a few sessions with briefing with boards of just like art of the possible, or it might be reaching out to our partners to say, actually, just help us understand the art of the possible. There's so much noise around this capability. Help me ground my thinking in what could I do for my organization? Here's what I want to achieve. How do you do it? And I guess ask the question would be my one ask. And I've got an opportunity to plug anything, but that piece is frame the context from what's my business strategy, what's the outcome. Reach out to myself, reach out to your Microsoft account executives, but with a business problem, not with a solution. Like, can you help me with resource augmented generation? What's the business problem that you want to solve? And we can help you work back from that to what technologies might help you solve it. That would be my one ask.
Well, I'd recommend all of the viewers to go and follow Matt on LinkedIn. I love all the insights you share. You're on the circuit, presenting at a lot of conferences as well. So Matt, we are always eager to hear more from you. I can only thank you for coming on the podcast and spending time with us. And we'd love to have you back again in the future and give us more insights and share more experience.
Thank you for the invite, Turan. It's been a pleasure as always, and glad I haven't outstayed my welcome.